Turning now to one of the biggest financial tech themes in recent times. Bitcoin, you either love it or you hate it. It has its fair share of critics. It's been criticised for everything from being used by criminals to being exposed to hacking. Let's separate some fact from fiction here and bust the myths. We have Leigh Travers from DigitalX. Leigh, pleasure to have you on the program. Has COVID impacted at all, I guess, the attractiveness of Bitcoin to the regular investor?
I think it definitely has. You're looking at where gold markets have moved in recent times, and they've really responded to that stimulus that we've seen in global markets. When you've got that printing of currency that we've seen, US dollars were up about 25% year to date in terms of the amount of extra US dollars that are in the market. Looking at a finite supply alternative like Bitcoin, that is purely digital in a world that's moving to digital money. We're hearing more and more about central banks looking to use blockchain to store their digital dollars and manage their digital dollars in the future. So yeah, it's been a real acceleration of trends towards digital as well as Bitcoin and alternatives to cash.
Some of the myths or misconceptions you say in Bitcoin, often it's sort of Bitcoin's not backed by anything, it should be worthless. There's a lot of concern that you can just lose your Bitcoin overnight. Somehow. What's your sort of, I guess, what's your main grievance with some of these misconceptions, and what do you say to those that believe these?
Well, I think they've been pretty steady in terms of those, the main media articles that you see online were those that don't yet understand it, criticise it quite quickly, and Bitcoin not being backed by anything is an obvious one. We know cash, since the 1970s, moved off the gold standard. Cash is not backed by anything either. There's nothing underlying it other than trust in the government. And looking at having Bitcoin, it's actually backed by math and cryptography. That's the most secure computing network in the world. So I'd argue there's more substance backing Bitcoin than there is central bank issued currency.
Are we starting to see more institutional acceptance of Bitcoin?
That's also coincided with COVID. To see institutions come into the market at the same time as you've got this uncertainty. We saw one of the well-known macro investors, Paul Tudor Jones. He's got a net worth of over $5 billion. He said that he's seeing the Bitcoin market similar to the gold market pre-ETFs, and he's advocated for between a 1 and 2% portfolio weighting towards Bitcoin. And to see someone coming out like that and essentially reduce career risk for institutions wanting to participate in the space, I think was huge. The other one that we saw over on NASDAQ was MicroStrategy. They have around $1 billion in cash sitting on their balance sheet, and they've just added 425 million of that into Bitcoin because they didn't want to see the value of their cash eroded year on year, and seeing the erosion of that this year and seeing asset prices generally in response to this printing of fresh currency as well as stimulus, Bitcoin was an obvious choice for them. It certainly wasn't an overnight choice. They spent 3 months educating their board to understand what the investment opportunity was, the safe way to store it, etc. And they actually started with 250 mil at around 12,000 US. Price dropped 20%, and they added another 70% to that holding to take it up to 425 mil. So that's a pretty strong bet in terms of the total portfolio weighting towards Bitcoin. But yeah, they've also put in the education to understand it too. And the more institutions that come into this space, I think it, I guess, reduces the stigma around investing in Bitcoin, because it has been unfairly, I think, tarred by the media because of the way that, I guess, it was originally used. And all technology, we often see the same sort of industries flock to it first. Bitcoin has been no different, and it's moving to more of a retail and institutional focus after that, I guess, original use, from some of the illicit channels, as well as, from the adult industry and so forth. But yeah, really not uncommon for new technology to be used in that fashion either.
Well, Leigh, on that, I mean, these funds that have been launched, including the only Bitcoin Fund, what sort of investors do you see interested in this fund?
We are really aligning it so that financial advisors can introduce their client base to the product, so they can advocate and allocate easily to Bitcoin, because that's been one of the toughest challenges. It's been around a while, sure, but safely investing in the space has been a big challenge. We've seen a lot of the exchanges essentially go by the wayside. Over 50% of the exchanges that I've seen in my time are no longer here. So we want a really safe institutional way for investors to allocate. And we're actually seeing financial advisors allocate personally. So that's the first step. They're making PA investments before they can understand the product a little bit more. They're providing some advice from us in terms of get this product onto wealth platforms. We recently have been listed on NetWealth as well as PowerApp. And the next step is getting some independent research so that we can prove we've got an investment grade. While we've had a 7-year track record of securely managing Bitcoins, we really wanted to bring an institutional grade focus to the product. So we've got independent custodian, trustee, administrator, and it's also audited by BDO, who are one of the leaders in the space in terms of understanding digital assets. And we really think we've put together a product that can allow investors, qualified investors, to actually purchase Bitcoin and have that as part of a diversified portfolio.
Just finally, if you are wanting to get into Bitcoin, you don't know much about it, are there any key things you need to know heading into Bitcoin? There's the halving event, which you hear about, which a lot of people have no idea what it means. I mean, are there any sort of key sort of catalysts for Bitcoin that you need to keep an eye on if you're new to it?
Yeah, I think there's supply. There's 21 million. Zero was around in 2009. 18.5 million have been distributed into the market to date. That supply curve, every 4 years it halves. The most recent one we just saw in May, so that has generally been a big catalyst the year after the halvings in terms of that supply, has been big catalysts. I'd say the key areas to look out for would be growth in addresses, so unique addresses, who's entering the marketplace. We do know that if exchanges have issues, such as a hack, for example, that generally has a short-term blip on the price, and that I guess is more of a buying opportunity we've seen in the past. A short-term dip is a better place to be buying. The other element to note is that Bitcoin is a very volatile asset. So it is more volatile than gold, more volatile than dollars. We've seen 3+ retracements of over 70% from Bitcoin. So I think that volatility is something to be aware of and to allocate appropriately for that volatility. However, year on year, we are seeing higher low prices, which is just building that base of the Bitcoin price. So I think that's really, really important. And I think we're now sitting at around 60 days. The Bitcoin price has been over $10,000 US, which is the longest such stretch. So it's just really building up a base of around that 10,000 US or 15,000 Australian. Hopefully poised for the next run. I think the market is looking really good right now for Bitcoin.
Yeah, Leigh, good summary, particularly giving us the idea of what to watch when it comes to Bitcoin. Thanks so much for joining us here on Ausbiz.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Leigh Travers there.